Imagine a university professor, a man with degrees, a lab coat, and the world's respect, who looked at living human beings and saw only specimens, not patients, not people, objects for his shelf. This man didn't operate in the shadows. He worked in broad daylight, backed by the most powerful government in Europe. He had an office, a university title, and a direct line to Heinrich Himmler himself. His name was August Hirt, and what he did in the basements of a French university is one of the most disturbing chapters in the entire history of World War II. Before we go any further, if you're new here, welcome to War Heroes, where we don't sanitize history. We tell you exactly what happened, no matter how uncomfortable. Hit that subscribe button right now and ring the bell, because this channel exists to make sure stories like this are never forgotten. Let's get into it. August Hirt was born on April 28, 1898, in Mannheim, Germany, a city on the Rhine, prosperous and educated. His father was a Swiss businessman, which gave Hirt dual Swiss and German citizenship. On the surface, this was a privileged start, a comfortable home, a bright future. But when World War I erupted in July 1914, 16-year-old Hirt didn't wait to be drafted. He volunteered, specifically choosing to fight on the German side, even though his Swiss citizenship would have protected him from the draft entirely. That choice tells you something important about who August Hirt already was. In October 1916, a bullet tore through his upper jaw on the Western Front. He survived, and the German military awarded him the Iron Cross Second Class. He returned to civilian life carrying both a medal and a jaw wound that would remind him daily of what he'd sacrificed for Germany. After the war, he enrolled at Heidelberg University, one of the most prestigious institutions in Europe. He earned German citizenship in 1921, obtained his medical doctorate in 1922, and by 1930 had climbed to a professorship at the same university. To the outside world, August Hirt was a success story, a decorated veteran turned respected academic, a family man, married with a son and a daughter. But underneath that polished exterior, something dark was taking shape. In September 1932, months before Hitler even came to power, Hirt joined the Militant League for German Culture. This wasn't a social club. It was a hardcore nationalist and deeply anti-Semitic organization. They worked to purge German intellectual life of Jewish and non-German influences. Hirt wasn't dragged into extremism. He walked in willingly. When Adolf Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany on January 30th, 1933, by President Paul von Hindenburg, the doors of opportunity swung wide open for men like Hirt. In April 1933, he joined the SS, the elite paramilitary organization directly loyal to Hitler. 4 years later, in May 1937, he formally joined the Nazi Party. By the time World War II began on September 1, 1939, with Germany's invasion of Poland, Hirt had risen to the rank of SS medical chief. In 1940, German forces swept through France, Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands in just 6 weeks, one of the most stunning military offensives in modern history. Hirt participated in that campaign. His reward? He was appointed director of the newly established Institute of Anatomy at the Reich University of Strasbourg, a prestigious position inside occupied France that gave him something more dangerous than a rank: access. Here is where the story shifts from disturbing to genuinely monstrous. August Hirt believed, with absolute conviction, that Jewish people were a dying race, an inferior subspecies on the verge of extinction. And rather than seeing that as a tragedy, he saw it as a scientific opportunity. He wanted to build a museum, not an art museum, a museum of what he called subhumans, a collection of Jewish skeletons and skulls that he planned to display as proof of racial inferiority. He wrote in his own words that he wanted to create a collection where proofs of the degeneracy and animality of the Jews would be collected. In January 1942, Hirt presented a formal proposal to Heinrich Himmler, head of the SS. He pointed out that museums around the world had skull collections from nearly every race on Earth, but a proper Jewish collection was missing. He argued the war in the East had created a unique window of opportunity. With Jewish communities being destroyed across Europe, now was the time to collect specimens. Himmler approved it. Let that sink in. A university professor submitted a written proposal to murder and collect Jewish human beings as museum pieces, and the second most powerful man in Nazi Germany signed off on it, working with colleagues from the SS organization Ahnenerbe, a pseudo-scientific research group that carried out some of the most grotesque experiments of the war. Hirt and his team traveled to Auschwitz to hand-select their victims. They weren't selecting prisoners at random. They were choosing people based on physical measurements, height, skull shape, bone structure. They were literally shopping for human beings, the way a scientist selects lab specimens. In total, 115 people were initially flagged for selection: 79 Jewish men, 30 Jewish women, 2 Poles, and 4 others classified as Asian. Eventually, 87 of them were loaded onto transport and shipped from Auschwitz to the Natzweiler-Struthof concentration camp in the Vosges Mountains of eastern France, the only Nazi concentration camp ever built on pre-war French soil. Here's one of the most chilling details in this entire story. When the prisoners arrived at Natzweiler-Struthof, they weren't immediately killed. They were fed well for 2 weeks, not out of mercy, out of calculation. Hirt wanted his specimens to look healthy. Malnourished bodies wouldn't photograph well for casts. So these 87 human beings, men and women who had already survived the horrors of Auschwitz, were given food, housed in Block 13, and kept in reasonable condition, all so they would make better display pieces. It is almost impossible to comprehend the cruelty of that logic. On the nights of August 11, 13, 17, and 19 in 1943, the killings began. The prisoners, 57 men and 29 women, were divided into 4 groups and led, one group at a time, into a makeshift gas chamber that had been specially constructed at Natzweiler-Struthof. The bill for the gas chamber's construction, according to records recovered after the war, was paid directly by the Strasbourg University Institute of Anatomy. Hirt's own institution wrote the check. The gassings were personally supervised by Josef Kramer, the camp commandant who would later become infamous as the Beast of Belsen for his role at Bergen-Belsen. Kramer himself operated the gas apparatus and watched through a small window as the victims died. One man fought back. He refused to enter the chamber, and the guards shot him dead on the spot. The remaining 86 victims, 86 people with names, families, histories, and futures that had been violently stolen from them, were gassed to death so that August Hirt could put their bones on a shelf. Their still warm bodies were immediately loaded into vehicles and transported to Hirt's anatomy laboratory at the University of Strasbourg, where they were submerged in vats of formalin for preservation. The skeleton collection wasn't even Hirt's only crime at Natzweiler-Struthof. In the spring of 1943, he exposed living camp prisoners to mustard gas to test possible antidotes for battlefield use. A former Dutch prisoner named Gerrit Hendrik Nails, who worked in the camp's sick bay, testified at the Nuremberg Doctors Trial that a blistering chemical agent was smeared directly onto the forearms of 15 German inmates in April and May 1943. The wounds spread across their entire bodies. Some prisoners went blind. 3 inmates died in agonizing pain within days. These weren't rogue experiments carried out in secret. They were official, documented, approved. August Hirt was not a madman operating in the dark. He was a credentialed professor doing his work in the open. By the summer of 1944, the war was turning. On June 6th, D-Day, over 160,000 Allied troops stormed the beaches of Normandy. More than 850,000 soldiers had landed in France by the end of that month alone. In September 1944, Allied forces were advancing rapidly towards Strasbourg. Himmler, sensing catastrophe, ordered all evidence of the skeleton collection destroyed immediately, but the order came too late and was carried out incompletely. When Allied forces liberated Strasbourg in November 1944, investigators discovered the bodies still floating in formalin in the basement of the Anatomy Institute. Some had been beheaded. None of the planned casts or skeletal preparations had been completed. The project had been abandoned mid-execution. In a cruel irony, while Allied bombs hit Strasbourg during September 1944, Hirt's wife and son were killed in the raids. He fled the city with his surviving daughter, heading south to Tübingen and then deeper into Germany's Black Forest region. August Hirt was never captured. He was never put in handcuffs. He never stood before a judge. On June 2, 1945, just weeks after Germany's surrender, Hirt took his own life at Schluchsee in the Black Forest. He was 47 years old. When he was tried in absentia at the military war crimes trial in Metz on December 23, 1953, prosecutors didn't yet know he was dead. The hunt continued in Switzerland for years. It wasn't until the mid-1960s that the Israeli intelligence service, Mossad, had his body exhumed and an Israeli pathologist confirmed his identity from the bones. August Hirt had evaded a public trial. But he could not evade history. For decades after the war, the 86 victims had no names. They were entries in a Nazi inventory, numbers tattooed on skin. But in the 1990s, historian Dr. Tudum Hans-Joachim Lang dedicated years of research to identifying every single one of them. He found archives of the Reich University of Strasbourg at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, including a handwritten list of the victims' tattoo numbers, secretly recorded by Hirt's own anatomy assistant, Henri Pierre. Henri Pierre had hidden that list in the apartment of a woman he was romantically involved with, a quiet, extraordinary act of defiance inside one of the most evil institutions of the 20th century. Cross-referencing records at Auschwitz and Yad Vashem, Israel's official Holocaust memorial, Dr. Lang identified all 86 victims by name, occupation, and hometown. 46 of them had come from Thessaloniki, Greece. They had names, families, trades, lives, families, trades, lives. In December 2005, a memorial was erected at the Jewish cemetery in Strasbourg, bearing all 86 names. A plaque was also placed outside the Anatomy Institute at Strasbourg's University Hospital. In 2015, additional remains were discovered at the Institute of Forensic Medicine at the University of Strasbourg and buried alongside the others. The victims finally had their names back. August Hirt had lost everything, including his place in history as anything other than a war criminal. No tears were shed for August Hirt. None will ever be. But the 86 people he murdered, they are remembered. Their names are carved in stone. And as long as channels like War Heroes exist, their story will keep being told. Because silence is how atrocities get forgotten, and we refuse to be silent. If this video hit hard, do something about it. Hit that like button, share this with someone who needs to see it, and subscribe to War Heroes so you never miss a story like this. Every subscriber is another person who knows the truth. We'll see you in the next one. Stay strong.